Hello, and welcome to Week 5 of English 101. This week, your assignment is an annotated bibliography. So this assignment builds on what you did last week with the library worksheets. It's asking you to do a little bit more with your research. This week's video is going to be very short compared to last week. I'm just here to tell you a little bit about what an annotated bibliography is in case you've never done one before, which I would imagine is probably the case for most of you. I never did an annotated bibliography before college. And then also to just talk a little bit about taking the research you did last week and developing a topic from that, because that's really the goal. And again, since the annotated bibliography is your assignment this week, that's due Sunday, and the discussion board post is due Friday. In the discussion board post, I talk about, or I ask you to write out a thesis statement, a potential thesis statement for your upcoming paper. And then I ask you to talk about, well, what makes a good thesis? Is this a good example of a thesis? Why or why not? And you could certainly answer no to that. I mean, you may be in the stage of the writing process where you're still really working through your thesis, and that's great. You know, we still have a few weeks until the paper's due, and that's the whole point of these different exercises I've been asking you to complete, is to work through, to grapple with your ideas and work through, and through the process of research and reflection, come up with a really great thesis to eventually guide your paper in a couple weeks. So I would say that some of the qualities of a good thesis statement are that it should be very, very specific. You want a very narrowly focused argument. The broader your argument is, the harder it is to prove in a relatively short, 5-page paper. The more narrow your scope, the less burden of proof there is on you, the more easier it is to manage. And that's where the research comes into play, the research you did last week. You most likely started with a very broad topic, something you're interested in, and did some research on it. Hopefully, as you did the research, you learned more about it, and those worksheets were designed, if you did them in the right order, to take you through the steps of research, where you have a broad topic, you learn some more about it, and as you go, you narrow. The more you learn about it, you learn about the different facets, the different issues that are all a part of it, and then you can narrow, you can focus on what do you really want to write on. And so that's the idea here, is hopefully you've done enough research, now you're knowledgeable of the topic, and then you can write a paper on it, because you have the knowledge, you know what stance you want to take, where you're kind of going to carve out your unique place in terms of the information that's available on that topic. So that's the transition from last week to this week. And again, a thesis should be very specific, and your research should help you with that. Hopefully you narrowed your focus as your research went along. Some other criteria for a thesis: it should clearly make an argument. It should be something debatable, some readers might disagree with, something that you have to prove in the course of the paper, and that's why you have to write the paper. If it's a fact, if it's not really debatable, if most people would agree with it, then you don't have to write a whole paper proving it. So the first criteria is specific. The second criteria, I would say, is debatable. The third one I'll give you is there should be some kind of because reason. You state your statement because, and then you don't necessarily have to use the word because. It can be structured anyway, but some kind of rationale, some kind of reasoning, the logic that underpins your thesis. You're making an argument. This should be the case. Well, why should this be the case? So think that through and have a specific thesis that clearly makes an argument and clear logical reasoning for that argument. And that's what a thesis should consist of. Something you prove in the course of a paper that's very clear to readers, very specifically focused, and that you have a logical reason for. And again, hopefully the research you did last week can help you take your focus and tighten it up so that you can have a really great thesis. The second thing I want to talk to you about today is annotated bibliography. So again, a lot of you probably haven't done this kind of assignment before. I certainly had not done this kind of assignment before when I took English 101 years ago. And this is really just a way for you to do some more research. So if you look at if you look in the book to page page 377, sorry, in the book. I actually asked you to read that last week, but if you flip back to it, page 377, you'll find that that explains exactly what an annotated bibliography is, and also gives you a great example, 377 to 380. So it says that on the assignment page. If you go in to do the annotated bibliography and you're looking at the annotated bibliography page on Canvas where you'd submit your assignment, it'll tell you those pages there, even though they were part of last week's reading with the research. So it's very simple and straightforward. It looks like a works cited page or the bibliography you'd see at the end of a document, at the end of a paper. The only difference is in between the entries in that bibliography is a little piece of writing, usually about a paragraph or so, explaining a little bit of information about that entry, about that source, that journal article or that book or whatever it is. The example in the book that hopefully you're looking at right now, he uses 2 paragraphs. You don't need to use 2 paragraphs. If you look at the requirements, they only need to be 75 words, which is definitely less than a typical paragraph. A typical paragraph is probably anywhere from 125 to 250 words, so it's very short. The reason his are divided into 2 paragraphs is because he does a specific thing in each paragraph, and I do want you to do those 2 specific things, but you don't have to write as much as he does or separate it into 2 paragraphs. What I'd like you to do is just give a little brief summary of the article, what this article is about. As we're reading these articles and you're doing this research, I think sometimes they can be hard to understand. You know, I have some research I have to do this week for a project of my own, and I'm going to have to read a lot of research, and I don't always know what an article or a book chapter in an academic book is about when I first get started, and so you kind of have to grapple with it. But I think the best way to really show your comprehension of what you read is to be able to paraphrase it or summarize it in your own words. So the first couple of sentences can just be a quick, very succinct summary of the article. What does this article say? The second thing you do is then, how is it useful? How would you use it in your own paper? How does it contribute to your paper? And I think he illustrates this really clearly. If you look at the second example, he has the second entry. He talks about how he doesn't necessarily agree with the conclusions this argument comes to, but they use a lot of tables and graphs and stuff that would be good for him to cite in his own paper. So shows how it's useful. And that's the whole point here. And the reason I'm asking you to turn this in on Sunday and the discussion board post is on Friday is I hope through writing the thesis you get a very clear idea of what you want to write on for your argumentative paper so that when you go to do the annotated bibliography, you can find sources that will really be helpful. You know, look at your thesis. You can certainly use some of the sources from your library worksheets if you found some good ones there. But I think it asks for 6 sources, and you probably found 2 or 3 or 4 for the library worksheet, so you'll probably need to find a couple more. So look at your thesis you do for the discussion board post on Friday, and then again, like on that second library worksheet, extrapolate a couple keywords from there and use those to find the article. So I'm hoping as you get further along, you're further along in your process here with the annotated bib, you know more what you're writing about, you get some articles that you really can use in the paper. And so talk about that in the second half of the annotated bib. And I ask for 6 sources, but I keep the word count low, so you don't have to write very much. But you do have to find a good number of sources, and the reason for that is so that you can kind of pick and choose the best ones when you go to write the paper. I'd have to look at the paper prompt, but I think it's only about 3 or 4 sources, so you can pick and choose the best ones, and hopefully this process of doing the annotated bibliography will help you figure that out. So again, I hope it's clear what an annotated bibliography is. Works cited page with little paragraphs following each entry that explain what that entry is about and how you could potentially use it in your paper. And again, look no further than pages 377 to 380, and everyone's an author, essentially the little short chapter, chapter 20. That'll tell you exactly what an annotated bib is and gives you a good example, and you can just do that for the assignment. Mimic the example there, although you don't have to write as much as he does. And again, hopefully before you do that, you can come up with a good thesis based on your research from last week, so that you can find good articles for your bib based on your thesis. And again, to come up with your thesis, hopefully the research last week helped you narrow your focus, and you know that now you know what you want to write about. So now you can write a thesis that's specific, that makes an argument with logical reasoning behind it, and is very clear for your readers eventually. So those are the goals for this week. Those are the assignments. Contact me if you have any questions, and I hope you have a great week.